Hey guys, and welcome to Tech and More Tech. Today I'm going to show you how to install Homebridge on a Raspberry Pi completely from scratch. We're going to go all the way from installing the OS itself on the SD card for the Raspberry Pi, all the way to installing a plugin and making sure that it completely works. A bit of background for those of you that may not know, Homebridge basically works as a hub on the Raspberry Pi to connect non-HomeKit compatible devices with HomeKit. So for example, if you have a Nest thermostat and you want to be able to control it with Siri, well, by default you can't. There's no way of doing it. It's not compatible with HomeKit. However, there is a Nest plugin for the Homebridge, and that then allows the Nest to communicate with HomeKit, so you can control it with Siri and all your automations and everything. In order to get Homebridge up and running, there are a few things you will need. You will need a Raspberry Pi, you'll need a SD card to go inside the Raspberry Pi, and you will need a computer to run most of it on. I will be using my Mac to kind of remotely set up everything on the Raspberry Pi since they are just on different locations. And for a lot of people, I think that's going to be a very common thing to do. Even though this video is a little bit long, it is actually going to take much longer than the length of this video to get a Homebridge server up and running completely. So if you do want to actually do this, it's going to take like an hour or two. Hopefully everything goes smoothly as it does in the video and you won't have any issues. So if you are trying to get Homebridge set up on your Raspberry Pi using nothing but a laptop, this is going to be the perfect video for you. Everything is done step by step. I have a written version of everything on the website, techandmoretech.com. If you go to the link in the description below, it'll take you to that. I'll have links to all the sources I used for my information with screenshots and stuff like that in case a video is in your preferred format. So with all that being said, let's get started. The first step is going to be on the computer, so let's jump to that. Okay, so the first step is to install an OS onto this SD card that the Raspberry Pi is going to run off of. Now, Homebridge runs on Raspbian, so in the link below for this website, you're going to click on the first link and you're going to click on Download Raspbian. It's the most recent version of it. It's about a 2 gig file, a little bit under that, so it might take you a little while just to download it depending on your internet speed. But that's the image of the OS that you're going to need. They have a default installer. The way that we're going to do it is using an application called PiFiller because it's much more straightforward. You don't have to do it on the Raspberry Pi itself. It basically just selects the memory card that you're going to install it on. It finds the image and then just installs it onto that card. The other way of doing it is if you use Noobs, which is their Raspbian sort of default installer. But for this, again, you have to have a wired keyboard or a keyboard that you can connect to your Raspberry Pi. And for the purposes of this video, I just have a MacBook Pro, so I only have a laptop. I don't have a wired keyboard or anything, or a mouse. Well, I have a wired mouse for it. And that's how you're going to basically set it up. Now, I already have the image downloaded, so there's no need for me to re-download this 2 gig image. I'm just going to find it real quick. It's in my downloads. It's usually named by the date and then Raspbian some. There we go, we found it. Raspbian Stretch. That's like the version of Raspbian. So I can stop my download. I don't need it twice. I can see that this one was downloaded just a couple of days ago. Based off the date. And I've got PiFiller, which is a very small application. One thing I do want to mention is the SD card just has to be formatted in the FAT format. So if you just go to Disk Utility, select your SD card, that's how you want to format it. So once you launch PiFiller, just double tap it. It's going to ask you to find the target disk. So you just select it. Follow the prompts, they're pretty straightforward. Actually, you don't even have to format it yourself. It will automatically format the card that you are selecting. So you don't actually need to do anything, but make sure there's an empty one, or at least that any information you wanted on that SD card, you have backed up, because once you format it, it's gone. So then it's going to pop up with a little window so you can select the image file that you downloaded or the zip file. And then you select that. Kind of pops up and away every now and then. It's kind of strange UX for the program, but that's kind of how it works. It kind of just pops up. It's unloading the files, etc., etc. I'll speed this up a little bit because you don't need to see this in real time per se. There's very little prompts. You kind of just let it do its thing, and then eventually everything will be there. So you definitely want to select Enable SSH because it just does it by default. You can always do it later in the settings for the Raspberry Pi for Raspbian, but it's good to just enable it right off the bat because this is how you're going to basically control the Raspberry Pi from your Mac. So you don't have to plug it into your external monitor if you even have one and get a keyboard and mouse to control it. Everything's going to be done from your Mac. It's going to ask you for your admin password. Just type that in real quick. And then it'll just take a couple minutes for it to basically install onto the OS. Like I said, or onto the SD card rather. Like I said, it's kind of a strange program because it disappears, but you can see it down there in the taskbar. It's doing its thing. It takes about a couple minutes. Again, I'll fast forward through some of this because obviously you don't want to just look at something install for 3 minutes. And just like that, once you have it done, it'll pop up. It'll say it's done. It'll automatically unmount, so you can take it out of your computer and plug it into the Raspberry Pi. And that's where we are going to take over as you're going to do the quick setup process of the OS itself on the Raspberry Pi. Alright, like I said, this is the setup, so click on next. Just select your settings. They're pretty straightforward. Everything that you might imagine. Yep, time zone. I'm going to put my time zone. Not that it matters, but it's good to have. Use US keyboard. Next. Basically just going to do the bare minimum I need to on this, and the rest will be done via SSH on the terminal. So here's one thing. I can't type in a new password because I don't have the keyboard. If you have a keyboard, go ahead and type in a new password. The default is Pi. Change it to anything else. That way you're not vulnerable to attacks and stuff. What I'm going to do is click on this little button to exit that actually, because I'm going to create a new password a different way, and that's going to be like this. Preferences, Raspberry Pi configuration, that's what I wanted. This is where you're going to choose some of your various settings, and here's where I'm going to change my password actually. I am actually going to change it something else, so I'm going to blur the whole screen, and okay. Password has been successfully changed. Good. Interfaces, SSH enable. You want this to be enabled. If you want to be able to control remotely from your Mac, this needs to be enabled. Everything else is pretty much fine. Doesn't matter for anything else. Network at boot, doesn't matter. All of this is okay. So that's all you have to do. Like I said, this is the easiest way you can possibly have Raspbian on your Raspberry Pi, because that's all you have to do is run that little program on your Mac, plug it in, just get the setup done, and you are done. From right now, you can actually go ahead and click on shutdown. Well, you don't technically need to, but because mine doesn't have Wi-Fi, I connect it directly via Ethernet. It needs to be plugged into a different location, not onto my monitor. So I'm going to go back to my Mac now. So the first thing we're going to do is on the Mac is open up Terminal. So command space to bring up Spotlight, type in Terminal, and click on Enter. The next thing we're going to do then is type in SSH space pi at raspberrypi.local, hit on Enter. It'll ask you, are you sure you want to go into this? Type in yes, Enter. It is then going to ask you for your passcode. You're going to type in the new password that you set up that I recommended just before. Just one thing, when you're typing in your Raspberry Pi password, it won't show any characters that you're typing in, so don't be alarmed when nothing shows up as you're typing it. It will actually register, it just has the characters set to hidden. It's going to take a second or two, and it's going to be in your Raspberry Pi then. So the first command we're going to execute is the update command. You can copy paste this or type it in yourself, doesn't matter. What it basically does is tells your Raspberry Pi to find and download all relevant updates to the system. Now most likely it's going to be mostly up to date, but you never know what random little stuff needs to be updated. So you can type it in sudo apt-get space update and hit enter, or you can type it in. Sudo just means that you're doing it from an admin privilege point of view, so you're never going to get any errors saying that you don't have privileges to read or write files in any location. That's why everything on that list has sudo. Again, those links for everything are going to be down below, and the written version of all of this is going to be on techtechandmoretech.com, so you can follow along in a written version if you don't want to watch a video. Now this will take a little while, depends on your internet speed and your Raspberry Pi. As you can see, it's only about 12 megabytes, not a large file size, but it sometimes can take a while. So I'm going to speed through this, and then I will continue once all that is complete. Just like that, we're done. Like you can see, you don't have to touch anything, it just takes a while to complete. So we're going to move on to the next command now. So the next command we're going to do is sudo apt-get upgrade, and what all that is it installs all the updates you just downloaded. Very straightforward. You can copy paste the command, or you can just type it in yourself, and sudo apt-get upgrade and hit enter. This takes a while. This probably takes about 15-20 minutes, one of the longer processes. It might seem like it hangs toward the end there, but if you just sort of let it do its thing, it will continue. You will get a prompt every now and then, yes, no, just type Y for yes every time, hit enter, and it will go. It's going to take up a lot of the screen. Like I said, this is a perfect time to go watch a TV show or something like that because it's going to take a long time. As always, I'm going to fast forward to the very end of it and then continue from there. Once it's done, it's going to ask you to reboot. So all you got to do is follow that command. Type in sudo space reboot, hit enter, and it's going to restart your Raspberry Pi. Most of the time it takes about maybe like a minute or two just for the Raspberry Pi to start back up. So maybe count off 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then you can go ahead and SSH back into your Raspberry Pi. Now that your Raspberry Pi has rebooted, you can go ahead and SSH back into it using the same command as before, ssh pi at raspberrypi.local, type in your passcode and enter. You will be in it. Our next command is installing curl, which is a transfer tool that Linux uses. So sudo apt-get install curl. This one takes real quick, maybe 10-15 seconds. And then it'll prompt you at the end whether or not you want to auto-remove a bunch of junk that you don't need, like different plugins. And because this is going to just be a Homebridge server, you can go ahead and do that. So go ahead and type in sudo apt auto remove, hit enter. Takes maybe 15 seconds or so just to get rid of all that extra junk that's installed on there, and then you can continue on to the next command. And that next command is going to be to download the C++ compiler for the Raspbian. Homebridge runs as a C++ program, so you need a compiler for that code, and you're going to copy paste that ebash code. So the one that is there is for newer models. So if you have a Model 3 Raspberry Pi, you can copy and paste that code and it'll work just fine. I have a slightly older version and it doesn't basically accept that command. It doesn't get that version 8. You need to do it manually. Again, if you have a newer Raspberry Pi, a Model 3, B+, whatever, if you're an ARM v7 or newer, you can just copy and paste that command and it'll work just fine. If you don't have one, it'll tell you, you'll get this error like I did, and it says, you're running ARM v6 hardware. Unfortunately, it's not supported. Try using a different version. So then you're going to follow along what I did, where you can't use 6, or you can't use version 8. You have to use, I think, version 4, version 6, and it'll just be an older version of Node.js. If you're unsure which version processor your Raspberry Pi is running, you can run the command cat /proc/CPU info. So cat /processor, /CPU info, like you see on the screen there, and it'll tell you right there, model name, ARM v6 compatible processor, at the end there, v6L. So I'm going to show you how to get all the latest directories and latest files you can get for that type of version, so you can follow in that way. Again, if you have a newer version of a Raspberry Pi, you can just do the command that I showed at the beginning, and you can just skip ahead the next couple minutes because this process will be irrelevant to you. The most recent version of Node.js for a ARM v6 Raspberry Pi is 6.17, so you can copy paste the code that I have in the description below or on the website, or you can just follow along as you can see on the screen. You can kind of pause it, freeze frame, and type it in exactly as it is, because that will work. That first command, wget, as you can guess, just gets the files necessary from the website directory that you plug in there. And then the next one is to basically unpackage all of that data. So all I do here is unpackage that Node.js data that we downloaded. And then what I'm going to do is go into the directory file of that download and just get rid of the temporary, basically, user data that I don't need, just to not screw things up. I'll put the links to all the guides that I followed that you can see kind of off to the side of the screen, because they were very helpful to me. I just want to convey it more in like a video sort of real-time way. And then once we are done deleting that, we can go back to the home directory and we can actually install Node.js. Now that we have all the necessary files required, we can just type in sudo apt-get install y node.js, and that'll not take too long. Once Node.js is installed, you've really only got one more step before Homebridge can be installed, and that is installing some library packages. So copy paste that code right there, or that command rather, back into terminal. I mean, you can type it, but why not just copy paste it really? And that doesn't take long at all. It takes maybe like 30 seconds. And then once it is done, you can actually install Homebridge. So hit on yes when you get the prompt, and I'm going to fast forward to the end. And once that is done, we have installed all the prerequisites required for Homebridge. So the next command is to install Homebridge itself. So go ahead and copy paste the code right there and hit enter. Warning, this will take a while, also probably about 15-20 minutes. So I would highly advise just hanging out. Maybe make sure your computer can't go to sleep just so it doesn't freeze, doesn't lose connection with the terminal, with a Raspberry Pi, but it will go very slowly. It will go to, let's say, 75% of the way there, and it'll get like hung on a few things that just take absolutely forever. But as long as the computer stays awake, as long as that connection stays stable, it will eventually install. So I'm going to cut to the very end of it and take it from there. And once all that is done, we can now actually check to see if it worked. So if you go ahead and reboot it, I like to reboot after installing things just to be safe, to make sure that they actually installed. Once it's rebooted, you can SSH back into your Raspberry Pi. And once you have, you can just type in Homebridge, and that'll actually start the application. And we will see if it installed correctly. If it didn't, it'll give you some sort of error. If it did, it will show up with a giant QR code that lets you basically scan to add it to your HomeKit. Of course, nothing's going to be there yet because we haven't installed any plugins. We haven't put in the config file or anything like that. There you go. There's the QR code. It works just fine. But one thing we're going to do is, as you can see there, yeah, we don't have a config file. We don't have any plugins. So the next step is we're going to install a plugin. I'm going to show you how to set up a config file, how to move it from your Mac over to the Raspberry Pi. So installing a Homebridge plugin is very straightforward. Usually you just have to Google search the plugin that you want, and it's going to come up with a couple of different results. Usually any of them will have the exact command you have to execute, and they will tell you if there's any prerequisites. So I'm installing the SmartThings Homebridge plugin. This is, of course, for the Samsung SmartThings hub, so any Z-Wave devices are going to be able to then be controlled through that. In Homebridge, you don't need to install individual ones for every Z-Wave device you have. Doing it just for SmartThings is enough. SmartThings specifically has a more involved process that I will go over in a completely different video. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to install it. It does take a very long time, so I'm just going to skip ahead as usual. And then I will also show how to set up that config.json file that you need, and how to move it over from your Mac or from your computer to the Raspberry Pi. Then you are just about done setting up Homebridge on a Raspberry Pi. Now that the plugin has installed, I went ahead and just rebooted the Raspberry Pi. Just good practice from my part. May not be necessary, but it's just what I do. So now we're going to set up the config file. This is basically the last step to getting your plugin working. Now, as you can see on each sort of plugin page, it gives you a sample configuration file that you can basically copy paste. And And then what you're going to do is, I'm going to put a link to this site below. You can download this entire folder, and in there there's a config-sample.json file. And you're going to download everything. It's going to show up in your downloads folder. One thing I'd like to point out is, even though it's a text file, it is code, so you're going to need some sort of code editing software. You can't copy paste this into like Notepad or a TextPad kind of app, because it does have formatting that will then screw up the legibility of the file on the Raspberry Pi. So you want to get something like Text Wrangler or Sublime Text that will give you the sort of formatting necessary for code. So then you can open up that file, and it's going to look like this. You got your bridge at the top, and these numbers are the same for everyone. The next one is accessories. As you can see, there's the curly brackets, and you got the regular brackets. Anything inside the curly brackets is going to count as an accessory. So if you don't have any, you want to get rid of them altogether, because otherwise what it's going to do is it's going to think that, oh, there is an accessory, but it's blank, and it's just going to give you errors. So and then in the platforms part, or maybe accessories, depending on the plugin, that's where you're going to basically copy paste the configuration data that the website or the plugin sort of tutorial or the plugin site will recommend. And then once you save that as just config.json, then we're going to move it across to the Raspberry Pi. So if you stuck through the video so far, this is probably going to be the best part of the video, because this took me a while to figure out because it wasn't apparently very obvious. So if you are in the position where you can only make the file on your computer, you can't move it over to the Raspberry Pi any other way than just through terminal, here's how you're going to do it. So in terminal, you are going to just start it up. You're going to be in your regular computer, and what you're going to do is you're going to change your directory to where the config.json file is. So if you can see here, I've typed in cd space and then tilde slash downloads slash homebridge. So it's telling to change the directory from home to downloads to the homebridge folder. And what that does is it changes my root directory, or where I am basically typing my code in, or my commands, to be the homebridge. So you can see between the first two lines, first it's just Dr. Banner, and then after that it's Dr. Banner, homebridge, whatever, and then I type in my command. So the first thing I want to do is just double check that my file is there. I type in ls, that's list basically files, and you can see config.json is right there. So perfect. So the next command is going to be, actually going to be to move the file from the drive that we're in to the Raspberry Pi. So we're going to do scp space config.json, and the reason we're doing that is because we are already in the folder in which config.json exists, space pi at raspberrypi.local tilde slash dot homebridge. And you're going to type enter, and then it's going to ask for your Raspberry Pi's password. You're going to type that in, and that's it. It's a very small file. It should be very, very quick. And then after that, we can check to see if it worked. So the first thing we're going to do is go back to the home directory of our computer. And that's going to be cd space tilde, that's home. So change directory back to home. And then you'll just do the regular command ssh space pi at raspberrypi.local, hit enter, type in your Raspberry Pi password, then wait for it to load up or enter SSH, and then go ahead and type in Homebridge, and it will start Homebridge. And then if everything went according to plan, based on my video at least, you should have loading config.json file with 0 accessories and 1 platform, because in that file that I showed you, I had nothing under the accessories brackets, but I had my smart things under the platform. And then everything loads. This is what it should look like if you had no errors. So this is perfect, because now what you can do is you can take out your phone, you can scan that QR code, and you can add Homebridge to your HomeKit. Critically, the last step that we're missing is for this to auto run on startup, because as you can see at the very bottom, you can't execute any more commands. So if you close terminal right now, it will also close the entire session, and because Homebridge is currently running within an instance of the SSH session that we have started, it will also close. So hold off just yet on scanning it. what we're going to do is we're going to install PM2. It's basically just a way of telling the Raspberry Pi to start this program on boot up every time. And then what we can do is add Homebridge to HomeKit and you are done. So the last part of the complete Homebridge installation is going to be the start to boot part, and that's going to be just using a program called PM2. So go ahead and copy paste that code, sudo npm install -g PM2, and press enter. Now this is also, like many of the other ones, a program that takes absolutely forever to install. I would also recommend not doing the -- unsafe perm. I've tried that before and it tends to hang. So if you just do regular sudo npm install -g space PM2, like you can see on the screen, that'll work just fine, but it will take about 20 minutes or so. It'll hang towards the very end, but eventually it does get all the way through. So what I'm going to do is obviously skip ahead to the very end, and then we will be able to set it up so that every single time your Raspberry Pi reboots, if it ever has to, or if you ever need to, it'll automatically start Homebridge, because that's what you want. And then we're going to take our phones, we're going to add Homebridge to HomeKit, and we will be good to go. Now that PM2 is installed, we're going to go and set it up. So we follow the next command, which is just PM2 startup, hit enter. It'll take a moment just to get started, and then it's going to give you a prompt, a line of code, a command, to basically initialize what that startup sequence is going to look like. So it's going to give it to you right there. All you're going to do is with your mouse, select it, copy, paste, and hit enter. And then that will start the startup sequence. Because then what you're going to do is you're going to tell PM2 to start Homebridge, and then you're going to save that. So basically every single time your Raspberry Pi reboots, it starts up PM2. Within that PM2 startup sequence, it starts Homebridge, and that's basically kind of how it works. And just like that, we are almost there. It is starting itself up. You're going to follow the next command, very self-explanatory, PM2 start Homebridge as part of the startup sequence. You type that in, you hit enter, you wait a second or two. Once that is done, you will then hit the second command, which is PM2 save, and that's it. It'll basically start an instance of Homebridge every single time. At this point, there are two ways you can add Homebridge to HomeKit. You can either just type in the command Homebridge, and it'll start it up, and it'll give you that big QR code that you can scan. Keep in mind then, however, you will need to exit out of terminal, and then basically just unplug and replug your Raspberry Pi to get that boot up sequence again, so that the PM2 starts, so that Homebridge starts up again. The alternative is to just go into HomeKit and enter the code manually, and it's going to be the 8-digit code that by default is 031 something. I'll put it on the screen right now. So here it is on the phone. Go to the Home application. You're going to go to hit the plus in the top corner, add accessory. It's going to bring up the camera. So now what you can do is just scan that. It'll tell you uncertified accessory. That's fine. Add anyway. Now it'll take a couple moments for it to just load up. And if everything went according to plan, it'll tell you Homebridge added. Takes a minute or so. You can add it to the default room because it's going to show up as a bridge, kind of like a Hue bridge or a Lutron cassette bridge, something like that. You never actually have to interact with it. And then any accessory that you add is going to show up here. So I have a GE wall switch, which is a Z-Wave device on my smart things, and it shows up here. So now I can control my Z-Wave switch through HomeKit. And that's pretty much it. Here we can see in the rooms, default room, Homebridge is right there. In my office, I can see that my GE wall switch is there as well, and it works. As we can see here, I have a GE smart switch that is Z-Wave Plus, so it connects directly to my SmartThings hub. And then that SmartThings hub, I installed that plugin into the Homebridge. So now a device that was previously not compatible with HomeKit. Hey Siri, turn on the fan light.
You got it. Coming right up.
I am able to control using Siri and the Home app. And just like that, we have a fully functioning Homebridge set up on the Raspberry Pi. Everything from the automatic startup when it reboots to a fully functioning plugin and config file. I know this video had a lot of information, and maybe for some of you it didn't go as smoothly as you might hope. So please leave any questions or comments down below and I'll get them as best I can. I'll try to help you out and try to get Homebridge running for you. And I'll link all the different resources that I used. If you liked the video, hit that like and subscribe button for plenty more videos to come. And until next time, see ya.